Hello students, welcome back to our English class. As a start of a class, today I'm going to ask you all a few questions. I want you all to think about the questions and answer based on your experiences. How many of you like traveling? Yes, I'm sure many of you like traveling. What do you do while traveling? Many of us might listen to songs, while some read books, while some even sleep, right? So, moving on to a third question: at what time do you like to travel? Some of us like to travel at daytime, while some of us like to travel at night. But all of us like traveling. So, moving on to a fourth question: have you ever seen anything new while traveling? Obviously, while we travel, we get to know new things and we see new things every time we go out, right? Yes. So, moving on to a last question: do you note down your travel experiences? Ah, this question seems to be a little different. Many of us don't have the habit of noting down what we saw, but I'm telling you, it is very important to note down what you see when you travel because you might tend to forget them in few days. So when you note down them, it would be nice to see them in future and cherish the memories. So let's move on to our class today. So the topic of today's class is, any guesses looking at the picture? Yes, it is 3 at table. Sounds like a different topic. Before we move into the lesson, let us look at the author of the lesson. William Wimar Jacobs. William Wimar Jacobs was an English author of short stories and novels. He was born on September 8, 1863 in Wapping, London. His favorite subject was marine life. So here we see that William's favorite subject was marine life, that is, life underwater. Moving on, in 1879, Jacobs began his work as a clerk in the civil service in the post office savings bank, and by 1885 he had his first short story published. So here we come to know that in 1879 Jacobs has begun his work as a clerk in the post office savings bank, but in the other hand he has also started writing. And here we see that in 1885 he had his first short story published. And today, he is famous for his book The Monkey's Paw. He occasionally wrote horror stories. He passed away in the year 1943 at the age of 80. So now, knowing about the author, let's see about the lesson. Sailors always have tales about their voyages around the world. Read a story about a veteran sailor who one day decided to go out for a walk in the English countryside. Here is his narration about a strange incident. So, as we saw about our author, he liked marine life. He has written about a sailor, in fact, a veteran sailor, who went on a walk in the English countryside. And in the last line, we also come to know that something strange has happened, and we are going to see that in our lesson. Before moving on into the lesson, you might be wondering who a veteran sailor is. Veteran, a person who had a long service or experience in a particular occupation and is no longer in it. So, a veteran sailor means he was a sailor before, but he is no more a sailor or just a person with a lot of experience in that job. Now, let's move on into the lesson. The talk in the coffee room was about ghosts. So, the setting here is the coffee room. The talk about ghosts is happening in the coffee room. Let's read on. "I wouldn't advise you to believe all those," said a clean-shaven man who had been listening without speaking much. "You see, when a sailor gets ashore, he is expected to have something good to tell, and his friends would be rather disappointed if he had not." "Oh, sailors are very prone to see visions," interrupted another man firmly. "I've been at sea 30 years, and the only unpleasant incident of that kind occurred in a quiet English countryside," said the clean-shaven man. So here we come to know that few men have gathered and they're talking in the coffee room. And the clean-shaven man is none other than the veteran sailor. And he is going to narrate a story. Here the other men believe that sailors are prone to see visions, meaning they are likely to see dreams. But here, the veteran sailor says there is no ghost, but he also says that he has been in the sea 30 years, and the only unpleasant incident that he has scene occurred in a quiet English countryside. So let's see his narration. I was a young man at the time, he began. I had just come back from China. My family was away, so I invited myself to stay with an uncle. When I reached the place, I found it closed, so I decided to put up at the Royal George, a very decent inn. So, as we see, the veteran sailor is narrating a story which happened when he was a young man. He says that he came back from China, but as he was far away from his family, he decided to stay with his uncle. But when he went there to his uncle's house, he found it closed. So he finally decided to put up at the Royal George, a very decent inn. A inn is nothing but a place where you can stay, like a hotel. So the place of the inn is Royal George. Let's read on. The next morning, after a late breakfast, I set off for a brisk day's walk. The day was bright and frosty. I lunched luxuriously on bread and cheese in a small inn and decided to go to little further before turning back. When I found I had gone far enough, I turned up at a lane at right angles to the road I was passing to find my way back by another route. But this had several turnings of its own. I was soon caught up in a fog and wandered about miserably, occasionally shouting on the chance of being heard by some passing shepherd. So, what do we see here? After he gets into the Royal George, the next morning he have his breakfast and he gets on a walk. When he goes on the walk, the day seems to be bright and frosty. After a good walk, he gets into another small inn and lunch luxuriously. That is, he had his lunch there luxuriously. He had bread and cheese. And then he again decides to go a little further before getting back to his inn, that is Royal George. But walking, and walking, he seemed to have gone far enough. When he decided to finally turn back and go to the Royal George, he seems to have lost his route. And there were several turnings. So he seeks for help, but soon he was caught up in fog. When you're caught up in a fog, you won't even able to see what is near you. It's so dark and nobody will be visible. So he wanders about and finally he starts shouting for help. He thinks that if he shouts, somebody would come and help him. He says in the last line, occasionally shouting on the chance of being heard by some passing shepherd. So he thinks that if he shouts, he would be heard by some shepherd. Seems like a really strange time. Will the sailor be heard by someone? Will he get any help there? Let's look at it in our next class. So, I'm going to ask you questions based on what we saw. Question number 1. Who is narrating the story? Question number 2. Where is the talk about ghosts taking place? Question number 3. How did the veteran sailor look? Question number 4. Who were prone to seeing visions? Question number 5. About which place was the man talking about? Question number 6. Where did the man come back from? Question number 7. In which inn did the man decide to stay? And the last question, why did the man wander miserably? I hope you were all able to answer to these questions. So I'm giving you the answers. Check whether you were right. Who is narrating the story? A veteran sailor. Where is the talk about ghosts taking place? At the coffee room. Yes. How did the veteran sailor look? Clean shaved. Who were prone to seeing visions? Sailors. About which place was the man talking about? English countryside. Where did the man come back from? China. In which inn did the man decide to stay? Royal George. Why did the man wander miserably? Due to fog. After watching the video, I want you all to go back and fill up the Google form that's been put on in the Google Classroom. And your home assignment would be, I want you all to imagine that you have missed your way and you are surrounded by thick fog at night. What would your reaction be? So, in the story, our narrator is also in the same situation. I want you to put yourself in that place and imagine how you would have reacted at that time. Write a small para about how you would have felt and what you would have did and post it in our Google Classroom. We stopped where a sailor was stuck in midst of fog and was shouting for some help. So let's see whether somebody would come to help him. Luckily, I heard footsteps approaching me. A sturdy-looking countryman, hearing me shout, walked back with me for nearly a mile and gave me instructions how to reach. So what happens here? Instead of some shepherdmen, a sturdy-looking countryman has approached, hearing the shout of the sailor. He has almost walked a mile with the sailor and has helped him to move on in his way. Gave me instructions how to reach the closest village some 3 miles distant. So the closest village was 3 miles away. Let's read more. The 3 miles sounded like 10. A little way off from the road, I pointed to a dimly lit window, but my companion shuddered and looked round him uneasily. So, what happens here? The sturdy looking man is guiding him for the nearest village that was 3 miles away. But the sailor looks at a dimly lit window which is nearer. But when he asks about it to the sturdy looking countryman, he instantly shuddered and he was shocked. He looked around uneasily. He felt uncomfortable and he's looking around. Seems like he's scared about the house. So let's read on. It's no good there, he said hastily. Why not? I asked. There's something there, sir, he replied. Some say it's a poor mad thing. Others say it's kind of an animal. But whatever it is, it ain't good to see. Well then, I said, good night. I followed the road that the man had indicated until it again split into 3. So what happens here? As soon as the sailor asked the man about the house, he feels so uneasy and he says it's not good. When the sailor asks him why, the man replies that there is some kind of an animal or some mad thing inside the house. Nobody knows what, but it is said that there's something strange inside the house. So the man wants a sailor to not get inside there or anywhere nearer to that house. He guides him and then bids a good night and leaves. So when the sailor follows the road that the man had asked him to his surprise, the road again split into 3. So let's see what the sailor does. I was now cold and tired, so walked slowly back toward the house until I came to a small gate. So what do we see here? The road again split into 3, and the sailor had nowhere to go. So he decides to go back to the dimly lit window. That's the strange house. Why does he decide to go back? Because he's cold and tired. So let's see what happens. Opening it cautiously, I walked up a long path which led to the door. There was no light and no sound from within. I knocked lightly upon the door. I waited for a couple of minutes and then knocked again. The door opened suddenly, and a tall, bony old woman holding a candle stood before me. What do you want? She demanded gruffly. I've lost my way, I said. I want to get to Asheville. Don't know it, said the old woman. So, what do we see here? Yes, just like what we see in the picture at the right end, the man, the sailor, approaches the house. He has knocked twice as there was no sound inside the house. But after some couple of minutes, a tall, bony, old woman holding a candle in her hand has emerged out of the door and she asks him what he wants. She isn't really polite to him, instead, she is very much gruff to him. When the sailor says that he has lost his way and asks about Asheville, she says she doesn't know. So, what happens next? Let's see. She was about to close the door when a man emerged from a room at the side of the hall and came towards us. So, in the last slide, we saw the tall, bony old woman talking to a sailor. Now, in the picture, you see a man also coming towards the sailor. So, let's read on. Asheville is 15 miles far, he said slowly. So the man replies that Asheville is 15 miles far. Let's read on. If you will direct me to the nearest village, I shall be grateful, I remarked. The nearest village is 3 miles off, he said. If you will give me the pleasure of your good company, I will make you as comfortable as I can. So, what do we see in this paragraph? The nearest village is 3 miles far, but the sailor wants to go to some place because he's already tired and cold. When he asks for the nearest place, the man in that house tells him that he would be happy if the sailor decides to stay in their house. He also says that he would make him comfortable and asks for his company. I hesitated. They were certainly a queer looking couple, and the gloomy hall, with shadows thrown by the candle, looked hardly more pleasant than the darkness outside. You're very kind, I murmured, but. Come in, he said quickly. Shut the door, and. So, what happens here? When the man in that house calls the sailor inside, he first thinks whether he should go in or not. But later, looking at the gloomy hall, it seems pleasant to him because it's very cold and dark outside. So he decides to get in. And here we come to know that the name of the old woman is Anne. So let's see what happens next as the author gets in. Almost before I knew it, I was standing inside. I followed my host into the room and taking the chair, warmed my frozen fingers at the fire. So the sailor gets in, and as we see in the picture here, he is warming himself before the fire. Dinner will soon be ready, said the old man. I bowed and he left the room. A minute later, I heard his and the old woman's voices, and I fancied a third. Before I had finished my inspection of the room, he written and announced, "There will be three of us at dinner, we two and my son. I suppose you don't mind dining in the dark?" he said abruptly. So, what happens here? The man of that house says that they will be soon having the dinner. So, the sailor is also happy hearing it. But later he hears the conversation of the old woman and the man, and he is also able to hear a third person's voice there. Before he inspects about the voice, the man comes back and tells the sailor that there will be three of us at dinner. That is the sailor, the man, and his son. And when we read the last line, it says, "I suppose you don't mind dining in the dark." We all will be in want of light when we sit to have our dinner. It's already dark outside, and when you put off the light, it is still more darker, and you won't even be able to look at your food and eat. But here, the old man says that they're going to dine in dark. So let's see what is the sailor's reaction. "Not at all," I replied, hiding my surprise. "But really, I'm afraid I'm intruding, if you'll allow me." So here, the sailor is surprised to hear the idea about dining in the darkness, but still he accepts, saying he's not at all uneasy to have his dinner in darkness. So let's read on. He waved his huge hands. "It's seldom we have company. My son's eyes are bad and he can't stand the light. Ah, here is Anne." So what happens here? When the sailor says he's not afraid of dining in dark and he doesn't mind it, the man invites him for the dinner, and he also says that his son's eyes are bad, which means that he can't stand the light. He couldn't see the lights. His eyes are bad. That's why they have decided to dine at dark. Let's read on. The old woman entered and began to lay the cloth, while my host, taking a chair the other side of the fireplace, sat looking silently into the fire. The table set, the old woman placed 3 chairs and left the room. The old man rose from his chair, placed a large screen in front of the fire, and slowly extinguished the candles. So, what happens here is, first, the old woman comes inside the room and she lays the cloth, while the old man is near the fireplace looking at it silently. When the old woman has finished setting the table and the chairs for all 3 of them, the man rose up from his chair and he puts the large screen, that's the cloth, in front of the fire, and then he has blown off the candles. So they're all in dark now. Let's see what happens. "Blind man's holiday," he said. and groping his way to the door, opened it. Somebody came back into the room with him and took a seat at the table. The strangest voice I have ever heard broke the silence. So, what happens here? After putting off the light, the candles, the man goes and brings his son along with him. Groping his way means he's searching his way or feeling his way with his hands. Like we see in the picture below, the man is searching for the way with his hands. The same way, the old man was groping his way to the door in the dark, and behind him came his son. And they all sat at the table. And in the last line, we see the sailor says that this strangest voice he has ever heard broke the silence. So, what's that strange voice that he heard? Who was the third person that came in? Why was his voice said to be the strange voice? With a suspense, let's end today's class. Let's see what happens next in our next class. Before we finish our today's class, let's look at the important points of today's class. First, sailor gets help from a sturdy-looking countryman. He gets to know about the strange house, but still chooses to go there because he's tired and cold. Third, there are 3 people living inside the house: a tall, bony old woman, a man, and their son. Fourth, the sailor warms himself in the fire and is also ready to have his dinner in that house, which was said to be strange by the sturdy looking countryman. Next, they all decide to have their dinner in darkness. Finally, the sailor is introduced to the third person, who is said to be the son, and it is said that he has this strange voice. So, students, hope you will remember what we saw in our today's class. As a home assignment, you will be posted few questions based on our class about the lesson 3 at a table. You will have to fill the forms as soon as you finish watching the lecture. The forms will be posted in the Google Classroom. I hope all of you understood. So meet you all in our next class. Until then, take care, students. Thank you.